Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Pro Wrestling Chat. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Erschen. This week we pay tribute to the late, great Hulk Hogan, who just passed away today at the age of 71 years old. And, man, he is kind of a polarizing figure in the world of professional wrestling, isn't he? And in the pop culture in general, but you can't ever deny the impact he had on professional wrestling. Quite truly the biggest star in the history of wrestling, without a doubt. I don't think anyone had a longer run in wrestling on top that Hulk Hogan did. You know, when you say people like, you could say people like The Rock, how many years was he actually wrestling? Like 4 years, maybe 5 years. Stone Cold was, he did have a long career, but he was really only big kind of in the 90s. He kind of petered off in the early 2000s when he retired, Certainly had a huge run. Undertaker, sure, he had a big run, in the 90s to the early 2000s, definitely. But Hulk Hogan, started late 70s, was huge through all the 80s and all the 90s, and came back big in the early 2000s as well, So I'd say he had kind of the longest run, and not only was he probably the biggest baby face in the history of pro wrestling, he's probably also the biggest heel in professional wrestling history. When he went bad and joined the NWO and WCW and created the greatest heel faction of all time, my personal opinion. And they just ruled over wrestling, and with the biggest thing going in wrestling, they actually were able to beat WWE in the ratings for 2 straight years because of the foundation on the back of the NWO, which was just so hugely popular, And their merch sales were just off the chart with the NWO t-shirts and everything, It was such a great time, and I have to say, growing up as a kid, when I first went to see Rocky III in theaters when I was a kid, it just blew me away. I was like, holy, who is this guy? Look at this guy, taking on Rocky, this big, huge wrestler, so intense, but at the same time, he was very charismatic, very full of himself, and just a great character. Thunderlips, the ultimate male versus the ultimate meatball. He was just so funny, charismatic, but really intense at the same time, and that's how Hulk Hogan was as a character. I just love watching his old school promos where, his eyes are bulging out of his head and his rippling muscles, and just so intense, gets you fired up, and he was so passionate about it, You could say what you will. There's many people that have had better in-ring skills than Hulk Hogan, but he wasn't bad at all. I thought he was a solid wrestler, one of the great brawlers of all time, That was just his style. He was a brawler wrestler. He wasn't a technical wrestler, of course. But he was quite impressive when you watch those old tapes of him in Japan and stuff. He really stepped it up and did some stuff that were way out of his element, So say what you will about his in-ring skills, but you can never deny his charisma and his intensity and his passion for the sport of pro wrestling, and that's what made him such a huge superstar. And his look, of course. Just a monster star, he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, He really brought credibility to professional wrestling, And, I'm not going to sit here and just gush over him, because I know several things that he has done in his private life and in the media outside of wrestling have really kind of ticked me off. There were times when he pissed me off, and I was like, what are you doing, man? What's the matter with you, But Yeah, so as a person, he made some questionable choices, but, we all make mistakes in life, and I feel like he shouldn't be railroaded, for all eternity for the mistakes he made, because he did a lot of good as well in this life. He did a lot of work for charities and children in need. He donated so much money to the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and he went all around children's hospitals and visited the little kids and putting huge smiles on their faces, and that's great. He also, he was born again Christian, and he was into Jesus at the tail end of his life, and he had dedicated himself to God. He got baptized and reborn. And I think that did a lot of good for him as well. But that's also around the time when some of the worst things in his life started happening, started hitting him. And he went through a horrible divorce, and the sex tape came out. There was just a barrage of things that knocked him down. So yeah, he had some rough times. He made a lot of mistakes, but in the wrestling world, I don't think there's anyone better. To me, he's the greatest of all time in professional wrestling. He is on my Mount Rushmore without a doubt. So many of my favorite matches of all time are Hulk Hogan matches. Hulk Hogan against King Kong Bundy at WrestleMania 2 in the Steel Cage match, versus Macho Man, WrestleMania 5, the Mega Powers explode, I love that. Obviously versus Andre the Giant, WrestleMania 3, 93,000 people, incredibly huge. That's the biggest match in the history of professional wrestling. Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant alone put 93,000 people in that arena, One match. I just don't think there'll ever be any kind of spectacle for one match like that ever, It's just insane. Obviously, WrestleMania 6 versus The Ultimate Warrior was huge, title versus title. And that was a huge match, a great match, I think. And he had some great matches, he had some great matches with Ric Flair over in WCW. And obviously had a humongous run in WCW too. And I remember when he first signed with WCW and they did that ticker tape parade. I was watching on TV. It was like, wow, this is a big deal, And that really brought a lot of attention to WCW when, at the time, they were kind of definitely a distant number two, like how like AEW is right now against WWE, but probably even more so. But getting Hulk Hogan, that was a huge deal. Signing Hulkster that made a big difference. And then, of course, then they brought in Macho Man and a lot of other ex-WWE people that really brought the asses into the seats, and really made a difference. And, of course, the creation of Monday Nitro, that really kicked things off. But once he made that turn at Bash at the Beach, and became a bad guy, became Hollywood Hulk Hogan. I got the socks here. Hollywood Hulk Hogan, baby. Check that out. From his beach shop in Clearwater. So he lived in Clearwater. And apparently that's where he died, These two, the Hulkamania ones. Really cool shop, Lots of cool memorabilia. And yes, I did meet the Hulkster. Here's his autograph. I met him at this gym in Tewksbury, Massachusetts. He was part of the opening of that gym, and he was doing a big signing there. And it was around the time, the early 2000s, like 2002, 2003, when he had made his big comeback and fought The Rock at WrestleMania 18, huge match, and he had a huge run there, and that was, to me, his last great moments in professional wrestling was that run he had for a year there, 2002 to 2003, and it all ended when he had the big match against Vince McMahon in WrestleMania 19. That was probably the last great hurrah for him, in my opinion. After that, he really went downhill. You know, he started having more and more back problems and neck problems and knee problems. You know, having surgery after surgery after surgery. You know, but yeah, that to me was his last great run. Obviously, that match was huge against The Rock. You know, it's just an absolute classic. You know, I don't think there's a match that ever had as much crowd participation, you know, booing The Rock and cheering Hulk Hogan. It was crazy, man. And he was supposed to be the bad guy. He was Hollywood Hulk Hogan at that time. The NWO had come back to WWE. And yeah, they were making a splash, you know, wrecking people left and right. But so many people loved Hulk Hogan. They wanted to see that classic Hulkster back, you know, with the red and yellow, you know. They wanted the classic Hulk Hogan back, and he responded. And he felt it, you know, and you could tell, you know, he knew what the fans wanted, and he gave it to them, you know. Once he got hit with the rock bottom, and he got up and he started shaking, hulking up, you know, and the crowd just went berserk, you know. I love that. It's one of my favorite moments. Yeah. So, humongous loss in the world of professional wrestling. Yeah, like I said, I consider him to be the greatest of all time. So yeah, very sad day indeed. So, rest in peace, Hulk Hogan, and Hollywood for life, brother. What you gonna do when Hulkamania runs wild on you in heaven, brother?